At the urgent request of Israel, the U.S. military launched Operation Midnight Hammer, a strike against 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities. In the operation, the U.S. Air Force deployed 125 aircraft, including 7 B-2 bombers, which dropped 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators on Iran's Fordo and Natanz nuclear facilities. Short of using nuclear weapons, this represented the absolute peak of the U.S. Air Force's long-range bombing capability. Immediately after the bombing, President Trump posted on social media celebrating the complete destruction of Iran's nuclear facilities. The U.S. military's subsequent statement, however, downgraded the assessment to severely damaged. Pro-Democrat media outlets like CNN went further, reporting that classified documents showed Iran's enriched uranium had not been destroyed, and the most critical equipment, the centrifuges, was almost entirely intact. This level of damage, they claimed, would at most delay Iran's nuclear progress by a few months. Iran's official statements were contradictory. At first, it claimed the U.S. bombing of Fordo had only sealed the entrance, leaving the internal facilities largely undamaged. Later, however, it admitted its nuclear sites had suffered serious damage but insisted this would not affect its ongoing nuclear program. So, how effective was the American bombing, and what impact will it have on Iran's nuclear ambitions? To understand the impact, we have to look back at the history of Iran's nuclear program. Its origin, contrary to what most people might imagine, lies with the very country that is now its harshest critic, the United States. Before the Islamic Revolution, Iran, under the rule of the Shah Pahlavi, was America's key strategic pillar in the Middle East. At the time, U.S. aid to Iran was on par with, if not greater than, its aid to Israel. Therefore, as the U.S. supported Israel's nuclear research in the 1950s and 60s, it didn't forget Iran. In 1957, the U.S. and Iran signed a peaceful use of nuclear energy agreement, which served as a cover for helping Iran conduct nuclear materials research. In 1967, Iran's first nuclear reactor went online using 93% enriched weapons-grade uranium supplied by the U.S. Unlike Israel, Iran did not face an intense existential crisis, so its demand for nuclear weapons was less urgent. This caused it to miss its window of opportunity. After France and China successfully tested their own atomic bombs, both the U.S. and the Soviet Union grew concerned that further nuclear proliferation could endanger their own national security. They accelerated negotiations for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. The final draft was passed by the UN in June of 1968 and opened for signatures in July. Iran became a signatory to the treaty in 1974. Due to the treaty's restrictions, Iran could only openly pursue the peaceful use of nuclear energy. While it built a large number of nuclear power plants and reactors with Western assistance, its weapons development progressed slowly. By the time of the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the subsequent deterioration of relations with the West, which completely halted all nuclear assistance, Iran still had not acquired a nuclear weapon. Furthermore, the clerical establishment, represented by Supreme Leader Khomeini, was not keen on acquiring nuclear weapons. In any religion, absolute destruction is the domain of God. The emergence of a weapon as devastating as the atomic bomb inevitably challenges religious faith. Even if the Shia Islam practiced in Iran could, through the interpretations of high-ranking clerics, reconcile religion and science to some extent, a weapon of such destructive power would still shock the religious worldview of many ordinary believers and shake their faith. This was something the clerical establishment wanted to avoid. Therefore, despite the severe worsening of its international environment after the revolution, Iran paradoxically abandoned its pursuit of nuclear weapons. However, the outbreak of the Iran-Iraq War changed Khomeini's mind. In that war, Iraq, with the tacit approval of the West, used chemical and biological weapons against Iran, causing severe losses and at one point destabilizing the Iranian military and public morale. The war made Iran acutely aware of the strategic deterrent value of weapons of mass destruction. At the same time, the Iraqi army's destruction of Iran's energy infrastructure created a pressing practical need to restart its nuclear energy program. In 1984, Iran officially restarted its nuclear program. With the help of the Soviet Union and later Russia, it rebuilt its civilian nuclear capabilities. Under the cover of developing civilian nuclear power, Iran also secretly conducted nuclear weapons research. But no secret can be kept forever. In August 2002, an exiled Iranian opposition group revealed Iran's nuclear weapons program in the New York Times, drawing widespread international attention. Initially, through the coordination of Britain, France, and Germany, the Iranian government accepted the Paris Agreement in 2004, agreeing to suspend all uranium enrichment activities and hand over the final resolution of the issue to the UN Security Council. But under constant and intense pressure from the U.S., Iran felt the agreement brought no corresponding benefits and announced the restart of its nuclear program in 2006. To stop Iran from obtaining a bomb, the international community tightened sanctions, leading to an economic recession in Iran and sparking a domestic debate. A growing number of Iranians began to think that developing nuclear weapons under such severe sanctions was not worth it. Under these circumstances, Iran began to actively participate in the P5+1 talks, seeking to trade its pursuit of nuclear weapons for the lifting of international sanctions, and even reached a preliminary agreement. However, in 2018, the United States under President Trump brazenly withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and reimposed harsh sanctions. Iran responded by ceasing to comply with parts of the agreement. Overall, however, Iran's nuclear capabilities remained under international monitoring, and there was no evidence that it was on the verge of acquiring a nuclear weapon. But for nations like the United States and Israel, which don't play by the rules, evidence is irrelevant. They act based on their own perceptions and needs. Since the Israel-Gaza conflict escalated in 2023, the Israeli military has suffered mounting casualties and a severe blow to its public image, all while failing to achieve its war aims. Israel's internal conflicts have intensified. Facing challenges from the opposition, Prime Minister Netanyahu could only continue waging war, using his status as a wartime leader to extend his political life. He hoped a major victory would cast him as a national hero, saving him from a political reckoning after leaving office. But Israel's military operations in Gaza have already proven that today's Israeli army is no longer capable of achieving a decisive military victory against a determined resistance force. Netanyahu's only option was to drag the United States into the conflict. Although the U.S. and Israel have a close relationship, the U.S. is increasingly strained by its global military commitments and the challenge of a rising China. After Trump returned to office, he showed a clear intent for strategic retrenchment. Getting the U.S. involved would not be easy. Only by placing Israel in a true existential crisis could he force America's hand. Among the Middle Eastern nations, only Iran, with its size and relatively complete military-industrial capacity, has the ability to wear Israel down in a war of attrition. Thus, using the pretext that Iran was about to acquire nuclear weapons and ignoring ongoing nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran, Netanyahu launched a surprise attack. Iran's nuclear facilities, missile bases, and air defense systems were all severely damaged in the strike. A large number of high-ranking officials and nuclear scientists were also assassinated by Israel. No country could suffer such an attack without retaliating, let alone Iran, where anti-Israel sentiment is a political cornerstone. Facing round after round of Iranian missile and drone strikes, Israel quickly found itself in trouble.
its air defense munitions were nearly exhausted. To preserve its remaining capabilities, Israel rationed ammunition for its air defense units, which in turn caused its interception success rate to plummet. With Israel facing an existential crisis, America's strategic needs and the influence of the domestic Jewish lobby forced the U.S. government to act. And so President Trump, who had been preparing to scale back in the Middle East and had even deliberately skipped Israel on a recent tour, was finally roped onto Israel's war wagon.
Although attacking Iran was not part of Trump's original plan, when the time came, he went all in. The U.S. Air Force has a total of only 18 B-2 stealth bombers. 6 were flown to Diego Garcia as a diversion, while 7 directly participated in the bombing mission. The GBU-57 bunker busters used in the attack are America's most powerful non-nuclear weapon. The U.S. military's total inventory is only 20 to 30 bombs, and with the production line now shut down, each one used is one less they have. In this single attack, the U.S. used 14 of them. It was a massive investment. But the results of this all-out American effort were deeply perplexing. President Trump, the U.S. military, and the pro-Democrat media all gave different accounts of the bombing's effectiveness, and Iran's statements were also inconsistent. However, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, radiation levels around Iran's nuclear sites showed no abnormal increase. From this, we can basically conclude that the U.S. military did not hit Iran's enriched uranium or its operating centrifuges. Even if we assume the centrifuges were not running and were destroyed, Iran's industrial capacity could replace those losses in a matter of time. In truth, the reason Iran has not yet acquired a nuclear bomb has never been a lack of capability, but a lack of firm resolve. After all, the nuclear bomb is a mid-20th century weapon. Its technological requirements are not as demanding as people imagine, and the scientific principles are public knowledge. If a country like North Korea, with a weaker industrial base and later start, could succeed, there is no logical reason why Iran couldn't do the same if it truly committed to a sprint for the bomb. The issue has always been a matter of factional politics within Iran. Even when the pro-nuclear faction gained the upper hand, the pro-diplomacy faction, which advocated for trading nuclear development for the lifting of sanctions, always maintained significant influence. This has prevented Iran from making a final strategic decision. The U.S. bombing, in a sense, has done the pro-nuclear faction in Iran a huge favor. After this incident, many Iranians who had held on to illusions about the West, hoping to exchange their nuclear program for the lifting of sanctions, have been awakened. They are now demanding that Iran must have the bomb. Amid this public sentiment, the Iranian parliament passed a bill to suspend cooperation with the IAEA, signaling that Iran is beginning to shake off international oversight, which is typically seen as a prelude to a sprint for the bomb. Thus, in a profound irony, the American bombing, carried out in the name of destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities, has likely done the opposite, creating the very political conditions that will accelerate Iran's path to the bomb.